Hello. Thank you to everyone who's been following the last few days my progress at this course with the Oroshigane. Here we have the results so far. It's kind of hard to get the right angles for the camera to pick up what's going on. And some of what you see that looks like dust might be crystallization. It might be dust also. Some things that look like fingerprints might be fingerprints, but it's all, there's a lot of activity in here. So the cloudiness represents the more hardened part of the steel. So we've got, some good hardening down at the edge here and more towards the point. I did take a lot off of the good steel because of the shape, and the thing wasn't straight, and it's actually very easy to bend. Like this, I could grab this and bend it and probably snap it. But yeah, I was figuring it out. So did lose a lot of material, but what's left is, as you see, kind of nice. Got some potential. See the layers. So I got home, took the long way home yesterday, got home, was pretty exhausted. But of course I was also pretty excited. So got to thinking about handles. And I pulled out this piece of cherry bowl and continued to shape it. And it's really too short and too, I was thinking to go with this, but it's really too small for this blade. So I would have to extend the handle, and I was racking my brains thinking of how I would do that. And then I started looking at other pieces of wood, and I have a lot of different varieties of different kinds of wood kicking around. And in the end, I thought, I just really want to get this up and running. So give me something simple. And this is a piece of cherry wood that I had. So that's what I'm going with. It was whatever that was, 1.5 by 1, or what was this actually? Well, yeah, a little over an inch, a ways over. So I kind of eyed up the grain, and then I cut in with a saw and split it. And the split went very well. It kind of goes together like a vacuum. I'm trying to be careful because I don't want to mess that up. I don't want to raise any fibers or anything, but when it's together and aligned, it goes back into one unit pretty much. Now, if you glue with epoxy, you're always going to get a line there, by my experience. That was not well matched. That wasn't perfectly matched. There we go. See that? The split just disappears. But yeah, there'll be a line if I glue it with epoxy. But I'm thinking that because if I use this a lot, I'm going to sharpen through this hardened steel here. And I'll end up scraping off the etching and da-da-da. And at some point, I might want to still, because it's pretty big, this could still, it could have years of service, even if it's fairly soft steel, just getting sharpened away into a smaller and smaller Wharncliffe. Let me just grab a Wharncliffe for an example. Here's a very fine Wharncliffe of a more kind of traditional size, let's say, the Tony Bow's desk knife. So after some years of use, we could still end up with something like this. But of course, by that time, we'd be through all of the hardened steel. So it would be convenient to be able to have a handle that I can remove the blade for servicing. And so that is kind of my notion with this handle. And I guess the splitting could be convenient in that, because I've done clamshell handles like this before, a few, but usually I flatten the pieces. The different ways have their conveniences and drawbacks. The drawback here is obviously, there's an irregularity to be overcome, but the convenience is I don't have to spend a lot of time flattening these surfaces. And I flattened these a little bit to be able to lay it flat so I can drill it. So I'm going to talk through a little bit of my next steps, and that might help me to not mess it up and get things in the right order. So I made this little decal to help me, or not a decal, what's it called? Whatever that's called. And so I can, for example, this will really help once this is back in here, or once it's affixed in there, I'll know where the tang is, because I wouldn't want to carve so far as that I hit the metal when I'm doing the sway back. And the sway back, to get the more sway back I want, the more I'm risking that kind of thing. But if I get this basically affixed in there and pinned in, what I'm thinking is to use maybe a light glue. In fact, since I'm talking on camera, I'm even thinking maybe just not use epoxy at all, but use tight bond glue, which will give possibly even an invisible seam here, if I get it just right. And also, something that I've been thinking about. I mean, it's interesting. I've learned stuff from reading comments on YouTube. Yeah, so I saw a guy speaking about, just in comments, about when he does a Japanese style knife. I think it was more for kitchen knives, but he'll make it just so that the handle is extremely well fitted, and then use a bamboo pin and just friction fit it together. And then you can tap the pin out and take the blade out and do whatever you need to do. And so I really like that idea. And there's some of the New England School of Metalwork, some of the guys in the course were discussing this topic. And, the traditional Japanese knives, or Vikings as well, a lot of people with this kind of knife would burn the tang. You start by drilling a hole and you burn the tang and just keep burning your way in there, and you'll get a really tight fit at the end. So you don't need epoxy glues and this kind of thing. You don't need to split the handle like this. This way is quicker for me, and more what I'm used to. So I can just carve it in instead of burning it in, and then I can rejoin these. Something else they were talking about is the epoxy. You can heat up the epoxy to a certain heat that I guess is below what would destroy the heat treatment on the blade. Maybe you heat up the blade and that will heat up the epoxy, and then it'll soften and you can pull it back out if it's not pinned in, obviously, if it's just. But I like to put a pin in as well, or two, maybe just one. So my thinking is to drill the pinhole now. Well, two, maybe one that doesn't go through the blade, one that just goes, because if I can drill pinholes, this I've just been holding and shaping like this, whittling as if it were one piece of wood. You just grip it and it holds together like one. And whittling and sanding and so forth. Just to get a notion of where I'm going. So next step. As we can see, this is wider here than here, but I like to keep this thickness now because then I don't have to get the tang in here perfectly straight. It can have a little kick off in either way, and I've got material to work with. Obviously, this is also going to come off. basing my notion around this, but it'll be a bit longer and a bit chunkier, I reckon. So right, so then I'll have to compensate. So instead of putting this flat on to drill it, I'll have to put it on a block. And again, I'm going to have to do some guesstimations. So this is interesting. See how, well, you can't see the split there now. Now you can. So it goes that way a little bit, right? But on this end, oh wait, it does do the same thing. Right. So that means I could bring this in this way a little bit. It's not really important at this stage. Just need to get the blade in there and then whittle the handle around it, pretty much. But if I can have pins, and I can be taking this apart, you know, I could take the blade out, whittle the handle a little bit to start out with, instead of whittling the whole thing with a live blade. That could be nice. So I'm going for an assembly, disassembly. And so what they said about these guys at the school, if you want to be able to disassemble the knife, you wax the tang. And then the epoxy, you know, it'll be mechanically affixed in there by the pressure of the epoxy and the wood. You know, everything is kind of clamped in there, but it will not be bonded. Did I just say bonded? Mechanically bonded? I mean, it'll be, yeah, well, it won't be chemically bonded or whatever. You stop the, I don't know. I don't know how to describe or use the right words to refer to the different kinds of adhesion, but there are definitely these different kinds of adhesion, and it would certainly be a different kind of adhesion if you have all these scratches here and the epoxy resin can get in there into all these gaps and, you know, really grip on, versus you have wax and the epoxy just kind of smushed up against that, and then a pin. So I'm thinking maybe not epoxy, but wax the tang and just use tight bond, because then a pin will be going through it. But the pin, if I make it with a wooden pin, and also it could be glued in, I won't be able to tap it out, but I just drill it out. Drill through the pin carefully with a smaller size, and then work your way out, and you'll be drilling all the way through, out the other side. Now all that's holding this in is pressure, and you'll be able to tap it out. And you can go like this on an anvil, tack, 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 or yank it out, or a combination of the two. And so that is my plan. I'm going to get on with it. Thank you for watching.